You're listening to the Voice of Russia in Washington. I'm Kim Brown. Yesterday, the news out of Caracas, Venezuela, was that the president of that nation, Hugo Chavez, succumbed to an illness relating to cancer. He was 58 years old. Leaders from around the world have expressed their sympathies. However, the news of President Chavez's death is garnering a bit of a mixed response around the globe. This morning, we're joined on the line with Dr. Sreeram Chaulia. He is the executive director of the Center for Global Governance and Policy at the Jindal School of International Affairs, and he's joining us this morning on the line from India. Doctor, good morning. Thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Obviously, Hugo Chavez has been battling illnesses related to cancer for several months, and in recent days, the reports were that his health had taken a turn for the worst. Give us an idea, sir, about how Hugo Chavez will be remembered first in his home country of Venezuela.
Well, for the people of Venezuela, I think he was like a gale force in a sleepy country which had rotated between two feudalistic and oligarchic political parties for much of the 20th century. 1998, when Chavez finally came to power through democratic means, he was like a meteor from nowhere, and I think he completely radicalized the country and changed the possibilities. He used the state power to remake the society and in fact, the wider Latin American region. He was basically, in many ways a father figure, a teacher, what politics ought to be or is meant to be. People learned from Chavez, not only Venezuelans, but the wider region. He was talking about, some of the eternal ideas of the left, like resistance to hegemony, equality, and he molded them in a 21st century socialism framework. And so he could make these leftist ideals coexist with democratic means and democratic methods, including free elections. So I think, Chavez, for us, I'm from India, for most of us in the entire global south, when he spoke about economic sovereignty and control over one's own natural wealth, he renationalized the oil companies, threw out ExxonMobil and all these exploitative MNCs, and used the oil-financed wealth for redistributing land and for creating all these public utilities for the poor. This was social engineering on a grand scale, and people will remember him for all these extraordinary material changes in their lives. In barely 15 years, 14 years in power, he transformed people's lives in a very concrete manner. He was not one of those politicians who just make empty promises and then after the elections, no contact with the people. He was on the front line all the way through. So in Venezuela, I think, people are going to miss him so dearly. And, there is an opposition. There are people who are detractors of Chavez. But I think this is the kind of moment after his untimely death. He was barely just 58. He was too young. People are going to look back and say, this was Simon Bolivar of the 21st century. I don't think there's any politician who can match what he did for his people in the 21st century and deliver on the electoral promises.
You mentioned Simon Bolivar. Obviously, that is one of Hugo Chavez's tremendous influencers. And you mentioned also that Chavez was responsible for social engineering within his own country, but he managed to create a sphere of influence in Latin America that was leftist, anti-colonialist, in some aspects anti-American. What is his legacy going to be in Latin America, in that wider sphere where he has obviously people that he follows like Fidel Castro, and that people who follow him as well, such as the president of Ecuador?
Absolutely. I think the new left in Latin America began with Chavez. He mainstreamed it, and then so many others followed, be it Bolivia, be it Nicaragua, be it Paraguay, the entire region. I mean, this wave of the left, and remember, this happened during the peak of the so-called globalization, and where the United States and its multinational corporations and Wall Street were trying to dominate the political space around the world. So Chavez, in many ways, reminded us that the liberal prediction that this is the end of history and that it's all going to be liberal democracy and capitalism, is bogus. In fact, he revived the left after it had taken a battering in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. So what Chavez is saying is that, we're going to create a new kind of left that is married with democracy, with democratic practices, and yet is able to do all those things that the left had always promised. So for the region, he was a godsend, because remember, Latin America 1998 circa was still a region with a lot of feudal economic systems where most of the resources were being siphoned off outside the continent and not for the welfare of their own people. And secondly, you had all these latifundias, the so-called agrarian estates and feudal lords who were dominating the politics. So all of it changed. And what Chavez was saying in the name of solidarity was to create Venezuela as a kind of frontline state. He financed and gave a lot of foreign aid to Cuba, Bolivia, Nicaragua, just to mention a few. And he kept them alive when there were chances that they could be destabilized. In fact, Nicolas Maduro, who is now taking over from Chavez, has been saying that the United States is going to try to destabilize Venezuela and the whole region now in the absence of Chavez. So Chavez was that kind of, I would say, regional and global leader, a world leader, and amplified by his cult of personality and his charisma and all that. But he was saying, in unity lies our strength. So Chavez often used to talk about the Monroe Doctrine and about how the United States had tried to monopolize South America as its exclusive sphere of influence since the early 19th century, and how Chavez thought that the historic task for the entire region was to break free of this kind of hegemonic monopoly. So that policy, is now so mainstream that I'm confident even after Chavez, the region as a whole, especially under CELAC, the new Community for Latin America and Caribbean, is going to remain steadfast in insisting that America should deal with it on equal terms, not as an exploitator or not certainly as a kind of a feudal lord on a continental scale. So this is the legacy of Chavez, and you'll have to ask, after Fidel we thought there was Chavez, and after Chavez who? But maybe it's better to now also move away from personalities and to talk about after Chavez what rather than who, and what meaning, what is the nature of resistance going to be, what is the nature of Latin America's relationship with the United States going to be, what is Latin America's role in the world in terms of creating a more just international order. These are the big questions that Chavez leaves with us.
Doctor, when you talk about cult of personality, Hugo Chavez certainly fits that bill. And I'm reminded of a very famous speech, I'm sure you are aware of it, that he gave in 2006 where he addressed the United Nations General Assembly one day after George W. Bush addressed that same chamber. And Hugo Chavez came to the podium with Noam Chomsky's Hegemony or Survival book in his hand. And he got up there and he said, quote, "The devil came here yesterday, and it still smells like sulfur today. This table that I am now standing in front of." That garnered a lot of applause within the UN chamber, and it gave Hugo Chavez a lot of new fans and new detractors at the same time. Hugo Chavez was not one to bite his tongue, was he?
Oh, certainly not. I think, in fact, the fact that he was plain speaking and fearless was what endeared him to everybody. And of course made him also a formidable opponent for his enemies. I think Chavez was also very intellectual in that sense. I mean, he always carried books around. When he met Obama at the Summit of the Americas, he gave him a copy of Eduardo Galleano's famous book, The Open Veins of Latin America. And he was being the old teacher. And in many ways he was trying to tell Obama that, we need to create a different sort of relationship rather than the one that has lasted for 500 years between the European settlers and the natives of Latin America. So I would say that be it Chomsky or Galleano, Chavez always, loved to listen to books and to read out of them. And in that sense, that's another side of him. He was not just this fiery demagogue who was full of so-called conspiracy theories. Rather, he was also in many ways trying to raise the political consciousness of his own people and of the whole region. And that is something so precious. That's his greatest legacy, because if you create the political consciousness among the masses, then you don't need a Chavez as a personality anymore to drive it. I hope that, the revolution goes on, and with the same kind of high level of consciousness and alertness that Chavez always had towards plots and towards attempts to destabilize the societies and the regional unity. So all the leaders, from Dilma Rousseff in Brazil to Cristina Kirchner in Argentina, all of them have come out saying that the loss of Chavez is a loss for all of Latin America. And in that sense, I don't think, apart from Fidel and Che Guevara, there's ever been this kind of figure in contemporary times who could galvanize the whole region and to think about justice in a very practical and actionable way, and who could actually implement it. I'd just like to add a slogan of the Venezuelan people: without Chavez, nothing; with Chavez, everything. I think the spirit of Chavez will remain with the people.
Dr. Sreeram Chaulia is the Executive Director for the Center for Global Governance and Policy at the Jindal School of International Affairs. He's also a frequent columnist in journals across the globe. And this morning, we have been discussing the life and legacy of the Venezuelan president, Hugo Chavez, who passed away on Tuesday as a result of cancer. Doctor, we appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on your show.